Let me get my little script out. All right, hello everyone. Welcome to Regen Ag Practices with Del Ficke. Before we begin, I would like to say a big thank you to the IAC conference sponsors. This session is sponsored by our Champions of Native Agriculture sponsors, as well as the Wisconsin Tribal Conservation Advisory Council. And Del, you can begin your presentation.
Thank you, Patrick. I too want to thank all of our sponsors and everyone that's helped put this together. I know it's a little different than what everyone's used to for this type of event, but without everybody pulling their weight and sponsoring it and doing different things, we wouldn't be able to do it. So I'm honored to be a part of it. I'm going to talk a little bit about regenerative ag practices and some of the work we've done on my place and through IAC on the natural resources side. And so I'm Del Ficke, owner of Ficke Cattle Company and Grazing Master Genetics. We also do a research location for Green Acres cover crops in southeast Nebraska, where we try a lot of interesting things to allow people to potentially make more money and to build their soil in a really cool way. So next slide. Yeah, I'll just talk a little bit about this picture. Is one that we've really used a lot in the past. And I'd like to bring up the fact that every place on earth we can change and get back to the regenerative type practices. The first thing we need to regenerate is our minds. And that's certainly something that I had to do years ago. I stand in a field in this picture that was actually row crops only a few years before. And now it's getting back to a really beautiful prairie type rehabilitation site for us. And even though we don't have hundreds of species there yet, we've got 40 or 50 different species, and the ground's really, or the soil is really responding to the natural things we're doing. So next slide. That's my inspiration started as a very young child working with my grandfather, Adolf Ficke. He always rode a white horse. I don't know if that was his favorite color. He just always got the white horse to ride. But he was the naturalist, the real healer part of my life that really instilled a love for all the native tribes across the country, and an understanding that yes, they were here first in the regenerative type fashion, but my grandfather learned so much on his time after he was out of school for a few years on the Crow Reservation in Montana. And it was a very beautiful time for him, and he became more of a naturalist at that time in his life, and it really carried on until he passed away when he was well into his 90s. So a true inspiration and naturalist that would love the work that IAC is doing and all the amazing people and the things that we're trying to help get Mother Earth, back in line. Next slide. I think every presentation I've ever done for IAC, I've always had to throw in the Pawnee corn, which has been a beautiful project for my family over the years. Several years ago, we learned that the Pawnee were trying to raise some of their corn back in their homeland of Nebraska. And so we ended up raising blue corn for them for 3 or 4 years, which is just 2 miles north of where the old Pawnee camps used to be along Middle Creek. And when my family came to this country, they they certainly didn't know anything about it and were lured into a lot of different things that they should have never gotten into. But one of it was, trying to live out on the plains. In that first year, they basically about froze and starved to death. And always noticed that the smoke was rising down by the creek, and went down there and became friends and trading partners with the Pawnee, and basically saved our existence on the plains. And so I've been always indebted greatly to the Pawnee people, and now I'm honored to call them family with everything that we've got to do with them and continue to do with them. And it's just one part of one tribe in such a magnificent group of peoples that are doing these amazing things. So the blue corn is something that we really got started for them again, and raised the most blue corn they'd had in 140 years. The next slide. This is a picture from a few years ago. That's our main headquarters. 3 families live on that place now. We certainly aren't that green this year, or weren't that green. The seasons or the climate's changing quite considerably, and we're getting less and less rain each year, and needing to get just a little bit smarter each year with our resources. We do not have any water underneath us. In fact, we don't have much water, even for cows or for drinking. As you can see, it says the biggest farm well pump is a rate of 15 gallons per minute, which we're blessed with that. And we're blessed with the rains we usually get. Our area is all small patches. There's not many fields or pastures over 160 or for sure 320 acre pastures would be pretty big in our country. We've taken a lot of our former cropland and put it back to permanent pasture to really concentrate on the cow herd and what we're doing there. So several years ago, we really fell into that trap of we needed to do, or we thought we needed to do everything really large. And we were doing, I think, nearly everything wrong with all that farmland, except we had stopped tilling it back in the late 80s. 80 acres in our operation. But back then we were using a lot of chemicals, a lot of synthetic that were not conducive for our bottom line, and practices that were not conducive for the health of the environment, families, communities all around. We got hit by some type of disease caused. We couldn't quite figure out how I was going to exit that until 1999, when I started to have several series of back surgeries. So the higher powers they were telling me that I needed to stop doing that and do something else. So we really turned that operation on in, and really started to focus on, hey, we don't need this many inputs. Our soil is depleted. We're not doing a very good job of grazing, and we're certainly not using the right genetics in our cow herd, which gave us the idea to really step up. Even though we've been trying for several years to build our own breed of cattle, it really got us in high gear to, hey, let's put the finishing touches on this breed of cattle that's acclimated perfectly for a forage-based scenario. And so in 2015, we trademarked the breed Graze Masters. And Graze Master right now is a combination of Hereford, Red Angus, Aubrac, and Simmental. But I always tell people that it doesn't really matter what the genetics are as long as they work for you. The Graze Master concept is in theory how it can work in every type of operation, any place from high desert country to, Florida. We've got to work on cow herds all across the country and just tweaking a little bit and really making those cows efficient and work for those farmers and ranchers. So we changed our whole system. We really started to focus on the soil needs to get healthier. We need to get healthier. And hand in hand, we knew when we got those things right, then we would start to make, somewhat of an impact on society and start correcting a lot of issues there if we could get more people back to the farmer rancher and touching the soil. So, next slide, please. So I've always been a dreamer, and I did always have a lifelong quest to build the most accountable cow herd, which in my part of the world, I think I'm well on my way, even though I know I'll never hit that 100%. And thank goodness I won't, because then I wouldn't have anything to wake up to in the morning and try to do better with. We went from a straight bred cattle operation to a composite program. Then, of course, actually having a breed from that composite program. But for 70 years, my family raised registered Herefords, sold a lot of breeding stock and things like that. The Hereford has been a big part of our family tradition, and we knew that we wanted to keep at least a little bit of that in our new Graze Master composite. We wanted to convert everything we wanted to convert our machinery to grazers. We wanted to convert any of our grain operations into a grazing operation. And we wanted it all in sync with nature. So in this picture, that's a couple Graze Master bull calves. You can tell they look almost identical, even though the parentage is somewhat the same on breeds. It's totally different. And so we love that about the composite or the hybrid cattle and how we can really stamp them out with consistency. So I show that picture to everyone because we're pretty proud of where we started with those cattle. Next slide, please. So yeah, at one time I had $1.1 million in machinery debt, and now we have pretty much sold all the machinery. This is our new lineup of machinery. This is our new fertilizing and grazing, and for the most part, a lot of the haying operation is done now through grazing. Even though we still like to hay a bunch because we use it in a lot of conservation type and soil based programs. When we got to this point that we were grazing more than we were farming, and we were grazing more than we were haying, we knew that we were on the right path. And we also knew that we could get people all across the country on that same path. So this is just a group of Graze Master cows grazing some alfalfa, red clover, some timothy grass. They're doing the work, they're applying the nutrients. It's a very balanced machine. Next slide. Anybody that's heard my talks knows how excited I get about manure and urine, and the average cow puts on 75 to 100 pounds of that a day. So when we start concentrating these cattle in their grazing patterns, if it's via temporary fence, if it's migratory grazing, however it is, when we start really concentrating these animals, we can improve that soil really fast because they are recycling those nutrients so fast. It's coming in, 80% of it's going back out of the cow. When that manure and urine is on the soil, then the life starts coming to that because it's feeding it. So we have a lot of earthworms now where our dung beetle population has come back. In a big part because we stopped using porons and dewormers and things like that, because we got the cow herd back to in sync with nature. So another group of cows just grazing some alfalfa and timothy and things like that 2 or 3 falls ago. Those cows are equipped to graze on any type of forage. These look pretty lush. This year, most of our forage was all about 2 inches tall. So we like the way they were adaptable to conditions when they got a little tougher too. Next slide. So bale grazing is a big part of what we call our rescue or soil rescue program. So we'll put a lot of round bales out and just let the cows come into them, eat what they want. Of course, we're translocating seed. They eat what they want, they tromp the rest in. The nutrients from the cows were spread out evenly. We're starting to heal that soil in those spots. Most of the time it's, you know, a 30-foot coverage around where that bale sat. So in our test, and there's some figures coming up, we put some bales down in some spots in February, and then we soil sampled them in May. Next slide, please. So where we grazed the bale, it tested 4.92 tons of acre of dry matter. Okay, outside the grazing area, it tested 1.79 tons. Think of that. How much difference of 3.13 tons per acre if we would have covered the entire spot like that. Just by placing a bale there, just by letting the cows do what they do naturally, eat manure, urine, all that. It's amazing what they're able to do through that and what they produce and what they recycle. This spot where I'm standing is a spot that was super tough soil, really yellow. Of course, it had a lot of clay like a lot of our soil does. Absolutely no life to it, and very few species of grass. This is just a few months after we bale grazed in that whole spot along that creek. So when you can actually see the difference, we can talk about, you know, the impacts that regenerative agriculture can make, and people hear that over and over, but until their eyes get to see it, you know, they don't believe it. So what the ears can't hear, the eyes can't deny. The eyes can see it, and then that equates to, hey, I can do it on my place. Next slide. So this is a part of a USDA program through NRCS that we started on our farm a few years ago. This was on a patch of soil that we basically took in a decade from 2.6 to 6.9% organic matter in just a decade. So the old saying of it takes, you know, 100 years to build an inch of topsoil. In 10 years on this particular farmable piece of land, we gained 18 inches of topsoil in a decade. You can see on this the results of the water infiltration in the first run is over 13 inches of water. That's nearly half of what we get in a year. That soil's ready to take that all in. You look at it, it says it's 872% of average on the water infiltration. That's pretty amazing. Everything along there and all those lines are either above or right at, you know, the very good metrics. The field soil health indicator is a 3.0 out of a 3.0. When we did this just last year on the same field, it's actually off the side of the page now, and it's around a 4.1 out of a 3.0. So that's pretty mind-blowing. So the NRCS uses this a lot. They bring a lot of people to this particular field to show that it can be done. And it's a great way to show that when you work hand in hand, like with the government programs, with the NRCS, things like that, how that working together really equates into building more success in your operation, no matter what it is. It's in the EQIP program, whatever you're doing. It's an amazing way to really have professionals there to help you figure out what maybe you're missing out or what they get to see other places. So next slide, please. Okay. Do we have any questions by chance?
We do. We have a couple of questions popping up.
Okay.
The first one is, how much of that 3.13 tons extra is actual carbon that is sequestered out of the atmosphere?
On a carbon basis, I don't have those figures. I could figure them up. That was just based on the amount of tons, you know, that we gained over the spot from the 1.79 to whatever it was over 4. So the carbon equation in spots like that, what I've got to see with my work in carbon across the country is I would say in a spot like that, it could be 8 to 10 tons of carbon. It could be greater than that because we see an average like corn, soybean rotations with cover crops, they'll sequester about a half to 3/4 ton per acre. But this is really precision. It's a precise way of making those spots sequester a lot of carbon in a hurry. It's a great question. I need to get those figures. We've got fields that we're sequestering over 20 ton per acre. We've got native pastures with our grazing and things like that, and adding some different species of clover that are consistently in that 4 to 6 ton per acre per year. But for the most part, most people's soil is going, it's probably going to be that 1 to 2 ton max. So that was a great question. I wish I had those exact figures.
Okay. And the next question we have is, we are presently performing a test on our allotments, 640 acres, using regenerative grazing. For each 160 acres, we are using 40-acre paddocks, using electrified wires, and moving 170 cattle in 3 to 5 days on each paddock. Is this too many cattle?
Oh, no. And it's the forages are always going to tell you. So the forages and the cattle are always going to tell you if there's too many and you're leaving them on there too long. So I think that's totally cool. We've done 100 pair that we've moved, put on a half acre and moved them 3 times a day. It's however much you want to move them, but no, capacity wise, if the grasses or the forages are responding really well behind it, if they're coming back pretty fast, depending on, the area of moisture and things like that. But that is a great way to start in a grazing operation. And the more they get comfortable with it, the more they're going to push that envelope, depending on, water supply and things like that. But those are good numbers. That's a great start.
Awesome. Those are all our questions for now. Thank you, Del.
Thank you. And I may be having some technical difficulties. Okay, I'm back. Sorry, my screen went black. Okay, this is actually just some cover crops we planted ahead of where we did the Pawnee blue corn. We always use the cowpeas to fix a little nitrogen. Sorghum Sudan's always in there for a compaction, alleviator or buster. Hairy vetch fixes a lot of nitrogen. Hairy vetch is in nearly every cover crop species we plant, except in the summer because it gets too hot, and then we'll switch to common vetch. But we're not putting on any fertilizer on our farmable acres now because we're using cover crops ahead of everything, and the plants plus the animal impact are providing us with all the nutrients we need. Now it took 10 or 12 years to get there, but we know it can be done. Next slide. So this is what we call kind of our hay or grazing type package. We always love barley in there. We try to always let it seed out on its own, so we get some reseeding. Get some alfalfa and Shoshone sainfoin, which we love for our pollinator program. Turnips we don't use too much anymore because they don't do a lot other than like smell really bad when they're decomposing and things like that, and all your neighbors are like, what smells so bad? But it's a great mix. We always like to have something in there for the pollinators. We do have a pollinator program. We have a neighbor that has bees at our place and sells honey and things like that. We like diversity in cover crop mixes, but not to the point of like 30 different species, because probably a third of those are going to get choked out by everything, and it just costs you, too much money. So, a 5 to 7 way mix, targeting the things that you really want to target seems to be good enough. Next slide. So I get to work with producers that have a 1/4 acre up to 70,000 acres. And this was a garden site I did on my farm in eastern Nebraska. And it was really, really poor soil. So we did cover crops on it a couple years before, which you see on the left side was some forage sorghum and there's pumpkins in there, there's cucumbers, there's everything growing in there. We're trying to really break up that soil and make it so it's really productive for a garden spot. Where the gate picture is with all the crazy vines growing, that was part of the garden that we did the same thing with a couple years before, and the squash and melons and everything, tomatoes, all that work really great after those cover crops. So I always like to show these slides just so people know that everyone's making an impact. So if you have just a garden space where you can start, improving that soil and improving that food supply and, raising it for your family is probably far more important than even us trying to do things on a larger scale, because we need to get back to raising our own food and knowing that we're making that soil better, and knowing that our kids and grandkids and neighbors are getting really high quality food, because our food system has really been suffering basically since the 1950s. Next slide.
Del, we have a couple more questions.
Okay. Cool.
So the first one says, not sure if this is an appropriate question, but wondering if you could use wild elk to help improve the soil using bale grazing.
Well, yeah. I mean, if the elk population and everything is, if there's that many, absolutely, because they're still doing the same thing. Anything that has hooves, that's why the buffalo were perfect for the grazing and what they did with their hooves as far as the action to stir that soil and to make those little cups and to make those plants start growing with the seeds that are already in the soil. So it doesn't matter what type of animal that is available. That's like the coolest idea I've ever heard. Is they're going to come in and they're going to do the same thing as the cows. They're going to eat what they want, manure, urine. They're going to tromp some seed, tromp the rest of that, those stems and things in that soil, and really build that up. I love that idea. That's so cool.
Cool. Next question is, we also are thinking of using seed blocks for the cattle to eat to seed our acres with yellow clover. Is this a good cover crop seed?
Yellow clover is, my gosh, you guys found one of my favorite plants. So crazy story is, like, years ago when my dad was still living and in the 70s, the universities told them that yellow clover was not good. And so they tried to plow it in spots where they farm. They tried to kill it in these pastures. And now I'm seeding the entire farm. That's one of my big species that I use. Spot on. You will not find one tougher. I mean, you get a great root system. Depending on the area, it's not going to winter kill. It's going to seed out a lot. And it's going to fix nitrogen. And it just brings that balanced diversity to the livestock operation, and then the pollinators that are in the area too, that even if people aren't doing, collecting honey, the pollinators are something that we really forgot about on how well they do for everything that's growing around. Just like in our area, the soybean crop is way better now that we have bees in a 2-mile area. So spot on, love it. You guys are doing a great job.
Cool. Last question is, how did you terminate cover crops in the garden, or did you use winter kill varieties?
That's a good question. So I took a very primitive type rolling system, which was a heavy old piece of iron and just kind of drug it around by hand, and it snapped everything off, at the base. So it's like a roller crimper that you would use on a large scale for, planting into several thousand acres of cover crops. So I've done it that way. I've also used, like they're saying, things that just winter kill. I always like some oats in every cover crop mix, because they're going to winter kill, but while they're growing, they're cleansing the soil. They're pulling a lot of nutrients out of there and reallocating them. But the cool thing about it is when they die, they're feeding everything else that's growing all winter. So it's another reason why I do that. But a lot of times, if I'm using triticale or rye or something like that, I just let it mature out, and then it kind of falls over by itself, and I plant into it that way. So then I have some rye and stuff growing again in between all the plants that keeps the weeds down. So, I try to stay away from chemical type termination. I've used like a vinegar type solution, which it killed everything, but I don't think it did the soil a lot of good. But there's a lot of cool things out there that are coming to fruition now, that biological type things that we can hopefully have in the next couple of years that we can spray on there that starts, building that soil while it's terminating those crops to plant into. So those are good questions.
Sure. And then we have just one follow-up question on the elk. They're saying, regarding the elk, so many folks see them as a problem, that there are too many. I keep observing and seeing them as part of the solution. If you can provide any other suggestions other than bale grazing, please let me know.
I don't know off the top of my head, but we have to look at everything as, so I'll use the analogy, like weeds are the best cover crops. And when people hear me say that, they're like, you're crazy. But weeds come where nothing else is growing. So, it was put there for a reason, for the balance of nature. So the elk are not wrong. It's just our system has managed them wrong, or forced them into larger populations in smaller areas. So we really have to think from a balance standpoint. How do we work with things instead of just trying to get rid of things? So I wish I had other options or thoughts on what to do with the elk right now, but everything should be an opportunity, and we just have to figure out what that is.
Great. And then, sorry, we got a lot of questions coming
in. Hey, that's cool.
The next one is, we are thinking of growing traditional native foods on our land. Could you further explain no-till farming, and would it benefit the traditional plants?
Absolutely. So what we found, raising a couple different varieties of the native corn for the Pawnee, is they were developed under a very limited soil disturbance type program, because the entire fields weren't tilled. You were just basically making a few spots for those seeds to grow. So I am a firm believer in all the native species work the best under no-till, not disturbing that soil of anything. So why do we no-till? Well, moisture savings is huge. Every time you work an acre of soil, you lose an inch of water that's in the soil. On the flip side, the no-till with covers and things like that, you start building organic matter. For every 1% increase in organic matter, you'll save up to 25,000 gallons of water per acre. So it works hand in hand. When we reduce tillage, we're saving water. When we reduce tillage, we're starting to let the soil heal with other things and improving that organic matter or the health of the soil. is going to make that basically a sponge to hold. You know, I've got people in eastern Montana that they might get 6 or 8 inches of rain, and cover crops work great for them. Cover crops create that sponge that holds that next crop in there, even though they're using some water ahead of time. You know, they're using some water, but they're creating a beautiful base for that water to be held later. So no-till works great. I hope at some point there's going to be a healthy alternative to any chemicals that we're still using, but until we get there, you know, we have to do cool things with cover crops and things like that and try to make it as natural as we can. Any other questions? We're good? Okay, I don't know, this crazy little brain with the muscle deal. I like the free thinking part, because all the Indian tribes I get to work with and all the people around the world I get to talk to, the greatest ones, they're all free thinkers. They're not thinking about what someone else told them they had to do. They're maybe combining more of what their ancestors told them they needed to do, plus what they're seeing, what their soil, what their resources are telling them. So we have to listen to what the earth is telling us. We have to listen to what nature is trying to shake out of us. It was balanced once. We know we can balance it again. Humans, we've always been the worst thing in some ways to the environment, and yet we hold all the possibility of changing it and getting it right. Next slide. Oh yeah, just this is something that it's a great program that you can go to and learn more about all kinds of cool things we're doing through the IAC Resiliency through Agriculture platform and things like that. One thing you should be doing is following everything IAC is doing, because like I'm the weak link of what they're doing, because they're doing really cool stuff. So don't like gauge it by what I'm talking about, but they're doing amazing things. Next slide. My contact info, if anybody wants to talk to me, look us up, follow us, questions day or night. I absolutely want to help, do everything I can to make this world a better place, but I want to start with each individual. And I know we can do it because we've done it in the past. I don't know if there's any more slides after this. That might be it. End of show. Is there any other questions? How are we doing on, hey, we're not bad on time.
There's no more questions right now. The last question I have is, can we share this presentation once it is provided?
Totally. Yeah, and go to, if people want to go to fightcattle.com, our website, we do a newsletter once a month, and it shows our whole transition from conventional agriculture to what we're doing now over about the last 8 or 10 years. Please go to it. Those are all, just sign up for our newsletter. It's free. Read all those old newsletters, things like that. Like I say, all I want to do is help day or night. Please let me know. And this has been great.
All right, and that was it for the questions.
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. Well, we can go ahead and end here, but thank you, Adele, for joining us today and sharing your expertise, and thank you everyone for tuning in to this session. And
Thank you, everyone.
See you tomorrow. Bye.
Oh, hey, no. Before you go, we do have one more question that just
Okay.
This question says, thoughts on multi-species grazing? I raise sheep and would like to integrate cattle someday.
Dream. It's an absolute beautiful dream. So the multi-species, everything used to be grazed multi-species for thousands or millions of years. And there's only one big hang up with doing that. In you're starting from a cool side of it, because you've already got the sheep, and so you've got the good fences. So the cows are going to be a natural fit. They're going to eat a different forage than the sheep. The sheep are always going to, they're more browsers. They're going to eat different things. The multi-species deal, there's no way to increase soil health faster than multi-species of livestock and like an ultra high density grazing or a concentrated grazing effort. Like I say, if you have the water, I would be glad to help with any questions moving forward with that. And it is the most profitable operations I get to work with are multi-species animal grazing across the country, hands down.
Awesome. And then we have a couple more popping up. First one is, what are some of the tribes you have worked with? And the next one is, are you available to travel to assist us with our regenerative grazing project?
The second one first. Absolutely, I can travel. I love boots on the ground to see what people are trying to do. It's always better to be standing there rather than over the phone or some meeting or something like that on Zoom or whatever. Worked with the Pawnee. I've worked with the Navajo. I've worked with the Crow. The Winnebago in Nebraska. We've just started to kind of have our hands in their farming operation. And so we're really getting our feet wet with a few of the tribes that, since I started the whole COVID deal, has kind of really slowed us down. But I want to be working with all of them. So this is great. I'm glad that, you guys had so many questions.
Great. And then the next one is, as you have worked with multiple tribes, I wonder if you can comment on your observations about land access barriers for tribal producers or other barriers to adoption of regenerative grazing.
So the land barrier, that whole deal is so messed up that I've got to have a little exposure in trying to get some of that land back into the hands of tribal members and trying to make that so it's a profitable, switch for them, and to get more of the individual tribe members working on their own land again. So there's a lot of hoops to go through and to get through on that, but I think it can be done. It takes a little time, and there's a lot of educational programs within these tribes that are doing really well as far as when they do get some of that land back, those leases back and things like that, they're asking the right questions on the regenerative side and really want to make a difference. If it's with buffalo or if it's with goats or whatever, that they're asking the right questions. And I think in 10 years, it's really going to look a lot different.
Great. And it looks like that was the last of the questions so far.
Okay.
All right.
That's cool.
Well, we can go ahead and end here, but make sure you go and check out the virtual trade show and the sponsorship page if you get a chance to. So, all right.